All right, sorry for the delay. Like I said before, this project was started with interest with the Winneshiek County Historic Preservation Commission and evaluating mill sites throughout Winneshiek County. Our goal was a set of 50 unique mill sites. Up on the screen right now, this is one of the large baselines that served for this project was NLMO's 1940 survey of water power structures in Winneshiek County. So this was similar to the endeavor we took on this, and would be probably the last time a real mill survey was conducted in the county. Even when he conducted this back in 1940, very few people seem to have known about mills or where they were within Winneshiek County. He was able to identify 42 water power sites. 3 of those included the Quando Mill, which is in Winneshiek County, obviously outside of what we're looking at, and then 2 of them were the upper and lower dams, which were not a part of this survey. So in reality, he identified 39 mills within the county. Those include a real brief historical context, archival photos. Sometimes he took field photos of a few of these, but there was only 10 mills still standing at the time of his investigation. So this is kind of where we are, is updating kind of that inventory. So with our end in 2021, we began the archival research phase of this. The Winneshiek County Historical Society and the Winneshiek County Historic Preservation Commission provided the initial background data, archival photos. Barry Bennett with the State Historical Society of Iowa provided SIF forms, as we call them, site inventory forms, and then any National Register nomination forms for several of these mills, one of them being Big Stone Mills in Spillville. And then private collections, landowners, interested parties also kind of donated some data and their input on this as well. The methodology section of this that I'm going to discuss now, we'll talk about the archival research and then the actual field investigations. Our archival research was strongly based on review of plat maps, older maps. These date back to the General Land Office map, 1852 map, excuse me. And building off of that, a countywide 1856 map, 1874 county map, and then 1875 Andreas state map, and then 1886, 1905, and 1915, such and such. Sanborn maps were also used. Those were for more of city located maps. You can see on this one is the Attican Mill and Brewery Sanborn from 1894. Those are extremely beneficial in really nailing down locations of individual structures associated with these sites. Other stuff that was utilized for this was county histories. A really, really great source, I can't stress it enough, is the Winneshiek County Newspaper Archives. That is a fabulous research source. And then as a result of all this background, we were able to get 71 unique mill sites within the county. So drastically upping what we initially thought would be able to be identified with this. Again, this is a reconnaissance level survey, emphasis on non-invasive survey techniques. I would call this more of an intensive reconnaissance survey, if that makes sense. And what that involves, landowner consultation. None of these sites are visited without landowner permission, of course. Those that we don't gain access to, all the work is conducted from the private right of way. And that's usually photography strictly. If we have access to sites for more intensive survey purposes, any features are recorded with a handheld GPS. If present, cultivated portions of investigation areas were subject to pedestrian survey. We usually do these at 5-meter intervals, called them close interval pedestrian survey. And that's just to identify any potential surface artifact scatters at these sites. And then a geomorphic assessment is something that's pretty unique to this survey that we haven't done with the other ones. And I'll explain why we implemented this. Like we said before, there's very few standing mill sites in the county, and a lot of these are located in very difficult to access areas. So without kind of readily identifiable surface remains of these, you're kind of left with a little bit of a mystery to figure out. And so with the geomorphic assessment, what we're using is a 3/4 inch hand cord. We'll look at the soil stratigraphy. And what we employ with this is first identifying what the natural landform looks like. get that kind of sense. And then if anything that looks suspicious, like let's say a depression, maybe a trenching related to a mill race, that's further evaluated with the soil core to see the historic disturbance in that profile. So essentially, if you see a natural intact soil and then you look over and you see, the top 30 centimeters has been mucked up, well, then you have a pretty good sign that something's happened here. And so this was a great way to kind of document potential historic age features associated with mill activity. This is getting a little much into the technical weeds, but this the geomorph is, we use a lot of the DeForest formation, which was developed by E. Arthur Bettis. And that is a majority of these mill sites are in alluvial settings, floodplains. And this is kind of a model for understanding and evaluating landform developed in these alluvial settings. And so there's different members as they are based on age, soil composition, and development. I'll just kind of go over these quick. Camp Creek member is the youngest of these members, usually 500 BP before present. In age, Roberts Creek member is older, usually inset with Camp Creek. That's about 500 to 3,000 BP. Gooder is the oldest of the members and the highest of the terraces in this development stage. And then Quarrington and Flack members are kind of a little unique that can span all Holocene periods almost, but those are alluvial fans and colluvium development at the base of uplands. What's important with this to get out of that I would like to emphasize is with mills in Winneshiek County, at least what I noticed, particularly with where mills are located and mill races, the majority are on a floodplain setting, Roberts Creek member terraces. But what's even more interesting is how the mill races utilize a natural topography between these terrace steps and floodplains. So a lot of these mill races, at least that I encountered, would be positioned between where you'd have an interface between Roberts Creek and Camp Creek member, or sometimes Gooder and Roberts Creek member. So it's pretty interesting how they even in historic times are using the natural settings to their advantage. So field investigations, actual field survey portion of this started in May 2022 and just wrapped up here in June of this year. 61 of the 71 mill sites were able to be, as I called, the intensive reconnaissance survey, where we actually were able to be on site, do some geomorphic analysis and such. Over 3,000 photographs were taken, nearly 1,500 GPS points, 108 soil profiles recorded. So we got a crap load of data. I have excerpts of the report, but it is nearly a 1,000 page report. So it's get your crap stuck in the mud. It's a good thing to get under there. Survey results. This is a township count of mills. Obviously, Decorah Township stands alone with 14. Bloomfield with 8. New in Washington 7. I kind of go on and on here. I'll just say that the only townships we could not locate any mills, at least archivally speaking, was Madison, Military, Orleans, Springfield, and Sumner. Of course, that doesn't mean there wasn't any mills in these townships, just based on our efforts. We weren't able to really identify any precise locations of mills in those areas. Water power. 52 of these are known to have used moving water. And when I say moving water, utilizing mill dam, mill race, to generate the activity of the mill. This is also a count by river body, Upper Iowa. And again, 15 mill locations along that, Creek River and Canoe 11. A bunch of these have single mills, and these are usually smaller drainage ways or tributaries. Again, that's strictly because of the ability to generate enough water power is a little more difficult as you kind of get up higher in these drainage valleys. And then 6 mills, we weren't really able to identify how they were operating with their power. Mill type, 25 of these, initially at least, were sawmills. A bunch of these mills were multifunctional in the sense that they started as either a sawmill or a grist mill, converted to perhaps a feed mill. Some of these are pretty unique. The Trout Run Woolen Mill was a woolen mill, a grist mill, and then a furniture factory. You have your run of the mills, excuse the pun, but you had the Gaston Scale Factory, Klein Brewery on here, which, you know, is not technically a mill, but it did utilize the same water power as Dunning's Mill, which is just, you know, a hop, skip, and a jump away from where this was. And then the Freeport paper mill. 12 mills, we didn't really assess a function to, and again, that's, some of these mills only have basically a mention in the terms of a quarter section and a section for its location. That's all you know about the mill. So you don't have a lot to work off with a lot of these. All right, the cool stuff. 4 mills out of the 71 are still extant in the county, which really attests to kind of the state that they're in right now, but over 200 years or so, it's what's to be expected. 11 of these mill sites have stone foundation remains. The one you see here was pretty cool to kind of come across. This is what we believe is Essie's Sawmill, which is right across the road from where Monique Village. This would have been the second sawmill of the former village of Monique, we believe. Didn't know a darn thing about it. You know, we weren't expecting to find anything on these, and sure enough, we have a nice cut bank erosion going on here to show the foundation remains. 10 of these mill sites also had really well expressed depressions. These are really uniform kind of indications of a former structure, particularly their foundation was there. 11 mill sites at intact or partially intact mill races. The one at the top there is Blake's Sawmill. That's a really, really nicely preserved one in Bloomfield Township, and that's one that utilizes, again, natural topography. That one is placed at the base of the upland on the floodplain. But its south wall there, as you can see, is using upland base slope, back slope. So it's kind of really, really interesting how the settings were used in this. Below there is the remains of a timber crib constructed dam with Blakeman's Mill. Again, these are features that are kind of been unknown about with these mills. So just being able to kind of come across these really was surprising. We really were not expecting to find much with this survey. And to come across this kind of data is really eye-opening to say that there's still evidence of these mills and their associated features. I'm going to discuss the report now. This is kind of what we've all spit out. I have excerpts of Burr Oak Township if anyone wants to kind of breeze through these. Again, this is a very large mill. It'll be made available on the website. Winneshiek County Historic Preserver, is it?
Yeah, it'll be on our Winneshiek County Courthouse website, and so you can access the entire 1,000-page document from your home or
It's light reading if you want. But anyway, so the presentation layout, this is kind of a little page-by-page description here. The first page is where you kind of hit the hard facts on stuff. These mills, the 71 mills, are organized by a mill ID, and that's just for an organizational purpose for, especially with GIS, with how we work with these. The fields also include mill name, alternative names. A lot of these mills were referred to by multiple names. That usually reflects different ownership of the mill. Significant dates are included in general these field headings. Previous site identification with these. So a lot of these, well, I shouldn't say a lot, but a good handful have associated archaeological sites with the Boston State Archaeologist, or even some structure inventory form numbers. Few and far between, but still that's a part of it. And then documented landforms and features are kind of included. And these are just the top fields here. So those are your real basic kind of overviews. But what's included with kind of the meat of these is historical context. Some of these can be pretty long, and that's just, you know, because there's a lot of really great information actually on a couple of these mills. And then I also include a field investigation results with each of these mills. And again, that's quite a bit of information with what was found on these. Some of these mill sites, you know, there's a lot of archaeology present, believe it or not. Another thing that's included with this that we haven't done with previous surveys like this we've done, we're including scale maps. And this is just kind of identifying the features that were found, because again, you can't see any of this if you drive by or walk, you know. This is just to kind of help guide any future kind of investigative work that wants to be done with this. This is the cold water mill here. This is one that has a proposed mill site, which is what we delineate in the red on these. And then we also include related features such as former roads, mill races at present, and we also differentiate between intact portions and non-intact portions. And then just kind of general locational stuff, ground covers, et cetera, stuff that we identified in the field during survey. The 2 and 3 page of these, that's where we have individual kind of windows, 8 per page. The first being all the historic age maps, the second being aerial photographs, and these date back to 1940. And then we've included a topographic map and an elevational model of these mill sites. Elevational models are really handy, with LiDAR imagery, especially with the new stuff that's coming out. You can see some really neat features just from your desktop on this. And that was a big help in really evaluating these. And then there's a select few sites on these that actually have a couple extra pages. And these are ones where either there's some additional archival images or illustrations, or during our field investigations, we came across some really kind of cool features. And so we wanted to kind of keep those included with the respective mill sites. And so we've kind of, some of these mills you'll come across in the book will have a few extra pages devoted to just extra images. And so I'm going to kind of lead to the end here. I included as the investigator kind of a locational confidence field with these presentation layouts. And that is just basically how well I felt that, based on what we did with our field work, how strongly I felt that the site did contain a mill, or how well we knew where it was located. As you can see here, 40% I would consider of the 71 mill sites, very high likelihood that the mill did exist at the site. And then considering that only 4 mills are extant in Winneshiek County, that's pretty high percentage. Moderate is just a reflective of, and this is more of a geomorph, the hand coring stuff we did. Moderate is just, we identified disturbances that suspect that it could be a mill. It's going to require additional investigation to really delineate that, but it's usually pretty promising results that it did operate in that area. And then a low confidence level, 25%, quarter of these. That's just, there's just a paucity of background information, and you're kind of just out there kind of hoping you come across something, and you usually don't. Those are ones that require additional research just to try to get some more locational data on that. Based on the whole survey itself, these are not included with the report. These are kind of personal recommendations, but 13 of these mill sites, there's really no further work to be done. They're either very well documented or have been completely destroyed, in the sense that there's just no valuable evidence to be obtained from them anymore. 17 of these mill sites, in my humble opinion, don't have a site form, archaeological site form, record form, but certainly could be. There's plenty of evidence available that warrants that kind of documentation. 11, I would consider ones that need additional geomorph work, looking at more some soil stratigraphy. These are ones that, there's some evidence present, but it's just, there's just not enough to really kind of make a definitive assessment. And so we'd like to look at those again. 14 require additional research, and that applies back to the low confidence phase of what I put in this report. And that's, again, that's a research thing. We spent a lot of time researching these, but there's still a handful of mills that there's just barely anything that could be found. And that's really going to be something where it's going to kind of come down to perhaps the general public to help with that. People that might know stuff that live nearby, private collections, any archival photos, et cetera, et cetera. Some of these, the only way you're really going to be able to say for certain that there's mill evidence is with systematic subsurface testing, which obviously is a more invasive kind of method, which is why I bring the GPR here. There's a guy in the back that's pretty clever with that stuff, actually. I won't point him out. So this is the Gaston Scale Factory here. We had a chance to kind of do a little kind of quickie GPR survey with that. You can see that stone monument's all that's left of it there. But we at about a meter deep with the GPR, you can still see that you're picking up some pretty strong foundation lines going back into the trees there. So there's just a small bit of that mill is exposed there. There's quite a bit still left below surface of it, which is pretty neat. But this is a great non-invasive technique to really kind of get some better evidence of what's going on in an area. So finally, to conclude, this survey far exceeded expectations for what we were gonna get for data out of this. I think we kind of went into this thinking it was a shot in the dark of really finding anything, and it turned to be quite the opposite, and which is why this has kind of been a several-year endeavor. It's just been a lot of great data that's been generated out of this. And so it's the hope that, besides, making the public aware of mills and their presence in this county, but kind of stimulate, preservation. As you can see on some of these, there's active cut bank erosion going on these. Obviously, when they're placed next to a river for water power, that's certainly something that can happen. But so hopefully this is something that can probably generate some interest in that. The survey itself hopefully could be also something, at least as a template, used for other countywide mill surveys. I think what we developed here, especially Derek Lee with Bear Creek Archaeology is the owner. He's developed this presentation layout format. So that coupled with how we approach investigating these sites, I think is a real good solution to doing some investigative work on these. And then if any other archaeological kind of endeavors want to be pursued with this, that's why we did the geomorph on this. That's why we have the soil profiles included with this. If there's more work that wants to be done, you have kind of a baseline, a guide of where to go, what to expect when you get there, and kind of decide where you want to focus your efforts. So finally, I would like to thank Winneshiek County Historic Preservation, of course, Steve Johnson especially, excuse me. Him and I work closely, but he has kept me in the loop on everything. He's always had my back on this. It's been a pleasure. The Winneshiek County Historic Society, they provide a lot of archival photos, background data, which is super helpful. As I mentioned, Derek Lee of Bear Creek Archaeology, he's the father of kind of this template that we work with, the presentation layouts. And then the landowners. I can't say enough to how receptive and helpful the landowners were on this. It's not often you get a guy covered in dirt coming up to your doorstep asking to pounce around on your property with a big metal stick. But I was blown away by how the landowners were receptive, and several of them even helped me do some of the survey work when I was on their property. So I was blown away by that. Very, very happy with how cooperative everyone was. So that concludes everything. I would be happy to answer any questions if people have them. Yes, sir.
Do we assume that most of these mills were standing at the same time?
Yeah, I would say, late 19th century, that's your prime time for mill activity. When you get in the 1850s, that's when you start seeing mills pop up in this county, mostly are sawmills. And then with the rise of the grist mill, prior to the wheat crop failure, that was kind of the mid 1870s, 80s. Really, that's when you're seeing most of these mills, and then you kind of see a sharp drop off kind of at the turn of the century. Yes, sir.
We see several turbines, but
Yeah.
is there any evidence that any of these mills were ever driven by water wheels?
Yes, there's several. Several were, overshot wheels. A lot of you saw, some of those steel kind of turbine wheels. Most of these mills, when they started, were water wheels. The problem was, especially in Winneshiek County, the water power in the beds themselves was just not enough. And so once the level wheel kind of came into being, that really improved efficiency. And you can see it in the archival kind of, as soon as the level wheel became available, all the mills started transitioning to that around here real quick. And that just increased the efficiency. You could serve customers same day with, grist grinding and all that. But yeah, I would say the vast majority started as just a simple water wheel, especially earlier on in the 1850s, 1860s and such. Yes, sir.
Looking at just some of the pictures of
Yeah.
the mill races.
Yeah,
And thinking about the stone mill in Decorah. with
Yeah.
the Distance between the dam and the.
Yes.
is quite extensive.
yeah.
How did they dig those in an era before steam power and?
I don't have a good answer for that, but that is something I've pondered myself because the engineering involved in these is pretty remarkable. Some of these mill races that I've come across, are 6, 8, sometimes 10 feet deep, 20, 30 feet wide. To put that kind of together and get that created is no small feat. And there's not really a lot of descriptive evidence, that they talk about when you hear about these mills that explain how they're constructed. But the fact how fast it is, it's also amazing how fast they build these mills. I mean, you'll see a newspaper mention of, such and such is starting a mill and then boom, 6 months later, it's in operation. And these are, 2-3 story structures, 40, 50 feet, it's quite remarkable, the ingenuity they had back then. But I think that's a really interesting kind of study in and of itself, is just how these were put together. Because, there's a couple of these mill races, half-mile long, which is just incredible, to be able to put that together. Unfortunately, like I said, there's just, less than a dozen left. A lot of them were filled in, to open ground for agricultural purposes and such. But again, that might insinuate also that you can still below surface see evidence of these trenches. So, but yeah, very interesting. Yes, ma'am.
Were they group built or commercially built, or when they were in existence, did someone, individual family own them? Did they charge for the use, or what was the deal?
Yes. All of that. I mean, there's quite a variety. I mean, for instance, the Iverson Mill, over in Highland Township, that was a family-run mill operated by manpower. I mean, there was 2 guys that would do the grinding with that. And just neighbors would come to get kind of their grist ground, which is pretty cool. Yeah, a lot of these early mills, when they were established, it was to serve just their immediate area. And I would include just the section that the mill was in itself, not as big. Once you get into the Decorah with those mills, that's when you start seeing some more commercial activity with these. But once you get out in the outskirts of the county, especially eastern part, that was just to kind of serve the immediate needs of the area. Where some of these are tucked in valleys, it's not an easy way to be accessible to. But I would say, a good portion of these were developed just to serve neighbors initially, and kind of go from there. Yes, sir.
Yes, do you see any patterns as to who set up these mills? Was it mainly old stock Americans, like from Ohio and Illinois, or the East Coast that moved in, or mainly Norwegian and
Yeah.
other immigrants?
Yeah, that's a really good question. I have to look at my notes again, but from my recollection, a lot of the millers that came through, a lot of them came from Ohio, New York. I mean, there's a lot of East Coast travel from this. And most of them were kind of Norwegian descent. But I would say, especially with what I've come across, some of the big states where you see these millers coming with their families, be Ohio, New York State. Maine's a popular one, believe it or not. The thing is, when they were coming east, once they settled in the United States, these families would stop 3 or 4 different spots on their way over. And that's honestly where they kind of learned the milling trade, is kind of on their way over. So once they got to Winneshiek County, they kind of had the know-how, the skills to kind of get going on this. And so, I think in terms of where you're seeing the most of these millers coming from, for one, it's a family business. They learn from their families. But another interesting thing that I've really noticed, just for an example, if you take the Bluffton Mill, individuals that worked at that mill went on to start other mills in Winneshiek County. For instance, the Bluffton Springwater Mill connection, the Mont Rodney mill over by Decorah. I mean, a lot of these guys, they would start working at some of the earlier mills in the county and then go start their own mill. So I think that's kind of the next kind of phase with this, is kind of developing kind of the lineage of how these guys kind of got their start.
So you're saying they were largely ethnic Norwegian, but they're coming from other parts of the country, or were they old stock American, like from?
Again, from what I saw, it's kind of old stock American. They weren't directly coming from Norway right to Winneshiek County. There were plenty of stops along the way, but, most of the mills, I would say though, from Norwegian backgrounds that I came across. Yes, ma'am.
Where on Trout River was that mill located?
Which one again?
The Trout River Mill?
That is, I can't pinpoint it. I guess if you know Glenwood Cave, where that is, it's right around that area. Sampson's property. So, who have also been very, very helpful on previous surveys, because when we did the stone structure survey, their house was incorporated as part of that too. So that Glenwood area is real interesting. Yes, sir.
Yeah, what are the four extant mills?
So you have Weiss Mill, Fort Atkinson, the Stone Mill, the Painter Bernat's Mill in Decorah here. The Castalia Roller Mill in Calmer, which is actually started as a feed mill, but is a planing mill, still in operation today.
So all these four mills are still in operation?
Well, not the Painter Bernat's, that's part of the kind of the Vesterheim display or kind of outdoor area. The Weiss Mill is privately owned. There is works in opening that up. I'm not gonna speculate on what it's going, but the owner is improving it actively. So there's gonna be kind of some activity with that. It won't be operating as a mill, of course, but I know he's going to great lengths to stabilize and improve that mill. So I would expect something in the future here with that one.
So your definition of extant is?
Fully standing,
All
all four walls and a roof on it.
right.
That is my definition of extant. And that's as extant as when you get past that, all that you see, the best evidence would be just, foundation remains at, 2-3 feet high, maybe. That's as best as you'll get in some of these other spots. So, yes, sir.
Yeah, yes, were there any sites that you were excavating where you saw evidence of FDR's, alphabet soup network programs, improvements like the CCC or WDA?
No, not particularly. I call it the Atkin Woolen Mill, over at, the trout hatchery there. That wasn't involved per se with that. Actually, they kind of covered up the site that was there. So I guess in terms of destroying sites, they were involved with that, but I honestly, I did not come across any of that with my research. Yes, ma'am.
I'm just curious, if we zoom out a little bit at a larger scale, if this has been done in Almaquee, or if, I would make the assumption that the driftless region probably had a higher amount of mills than other.
You're absolutely right. And that's, something I would like to really kind of look at more. I think the driftless region presents the highest chance of finding intact portions of these sites. And that's strictly because of just the topography, obviously. Hard to get in and out. So, it's not open to farmland, and so they kind of stay put. A good example of that, like I said, you probably saw an example that steel turbine wheel in the mill dam at Blakeman's Mill. That's along Canoe Creek there, very, very narrow valley, super high entrenched, you got steep bluff walls there. That, by all appearances, once that stopped operation, everything just sat there and it got buried with sediment that's washed in due to plowing on the uplands. So it's just kind of sat there as it was. So I would speculate, especially Almaquee County would be excellent for this. Yeah, driftless region would be really, really interesting. Yes, ma'am.
We live just off of Ferris Mill Road.
Okay.
Was there a mill there? I don't know if it's in Winneshiek or LP, it's kind of.
Sure, I didn't record anything along Ferris Mill Road personally. But there's a couple mills that are just on the other side of the border of Winneshiek County here. They weren't subject to this survey. The only one that we did include was the Old Mission Grist Mill. And that's because the mill race actually starts in Winneshiek County, goes across the border to where the mill was in Fayette County, along the Turkey River there. But didn't come across or at least record anything along that particular road you're speaking of. But not to say, generally if a street is named Mill or has Mill on it, there was a mill. Especially, especially when you see these town plats, you'll see a mill street. Well, you're gonna see a mill somewhere along it at some point, so. Any other questions? Great. Thank you for your time. I really appreciate the interest. Thank you.
Yeah, we're gonna be doing a repeat of this in October on the 20th, when we're gonna be hosting a National Register workshop. That'll be Friday, October 20th, and you're gonna be one of the speakers again for that. The other thing is, we just got back from our printers, our publication that ran at the same time that the survey was being done. And it's got probably 20 some sites in it, like Kindleville, like Bluffton, some of these other sites, and including well, for example, the Fine Brewery. And it's interesting, there is one picture that shows the Fine Brewery in the distance, but it's taken up by Phillips Park looking that direction, but it really shows Decorah in 1875 and the mill race and the river itself. So
And the colorization of those photos is
and
phenomenal.
is Jeff here?
He's at the farmer's market.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. All right, he's got for.
Yeah, he's got priorities.
So anyway, he colorized these for us, which, you know, usually I don't for archival purposes, but since this is for selling and people love to see in color, and we just discovered too, that you can see more detail sometimes from the shades of gray to color too. So anyway, these are will be for sale, I hope next week, the chamber
Yes,
and the Dragonfly. The Historic Society will be having them as soon as we get to them distributed to them. And the Beatley clocks and possibly Burl, because they sell some of the Loring Wildlife Museum and Park does too. So they would be available. I have a few copies here today with me. If you want to just buy them, they will be retailing at $10 a piece. It's one of our bigger publications. It's 63 pages. Normally keep it down to 52, but this was,
Worth it.
yeah, this was, I think, they're fine. I think with Shay too. So anyway, that's it. If you would want a copy today, that would be great. If not, the retailers will sell you next week. Thank you.
Thank you.